they have designed several interesting programs for ages 5 to 8 and 9 to 12. Let's welcome Miss Amanda.
Hello, thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to start by sharing my screen so that you can see some of the animals that we might see in Howard County. And I'd like you to answer things in your chat box if you don't mind. Let's see. Animal presents. All right. So do you know the names of any of these animals that you see on my screen? And if you know any of the names, go ahead and write them in the chat box. And there's another question on the right that's a little trickier to see. Do you know what these animals have in common? What sorts of things do these animals have where they all have similar attributes? They all can do a very important thing for our environment. So just go ahead and put things in the chat box, and as you're thinking about them, we'll learn a little bit, and maybe you can add. Dr. Yun, do we have any ideas yet for the chat box of who these animals are or what their job is? What they have in common, I should say.
Okay, I saw there are some answers. Bumblebee, butterfly, honeybird.
Very good. Butterfly, hummingbird, and bumblebee. And one of the things that they all have in common is that they all fly. And another thing that they all have in common is that they are powerful pollinators. So what is pollination? That's a tricky question. It's a big question. We hear the word a lot, but today we're going to find out a little bit more about what it actually is. I want you to pay attention because it will talk about some of the important things that pollination does and how it works.
Like all living things, plants reproduce to ensure future generations. But since plants can't move from place to place, they need a way to transfer pollen from one plant to another. Wind is a major pollinator, but it acts unselectively. Insects, on the other hand, pollinate flowers with precision. The bright colors and strong fragrances of flowers attract insects. Once lured to the flowers, insects discover pollen and nectar. Bees, butterflies, and other insects gather pollen and nectar to feed themselves and their young. As insects move from plant to plant, they transfer pollen from one flower to the next. Fertilization occurs and seeds are formed. Over time, flowers have developed colors, smells, and shapes that successfully entice insects. At the same time, insects have developed features and behaviors that make them more effective pollinators.
Next. So, if you have a thought about what pollination is, go ahead and write it in the chat box, and I will talk a little bit about it. Here is a picture of a flower with lots of its different parts labeled, and we're not going to try to learn all those things. But one of the big challenges in learning science and getting comfortable with it is not that science is difficult. It's that there's so many new words that we may not have heard of before. So we're going to learn a few vocabulary words just so that we understand how pollination works. And just remember, if you're ever stuck in science, it's really not about big, challenging things to understand. It's really just about understanding what different words mean. So in this presentation, we're going to focus on some words like pollen. Pollen is like the male part of a flower that has to get transferred to the female part so that new baby flowers are made. And baby flowers are going to be seeds. That is how a flower or a plant reproduces, is by making seeds. Often that flower or plant will create a fruit, and this area right here is called the ovary. That area right there will go from becoming part of the flower towards becoming the fruit with seeds inside. So the male part of the flower is created by, it's pollen, and it goes from the male part, which is the anther, or stamen is actually the word that I want you to really remember. The stamen, and it goes to the pistil. And in the vast majority of flowers, they have the boy part and the girl part all in one flower. But what a pollinator does is it takes that pollen from one flower and it flies it to another flower. Because although a flower can make its own fruit and seeds by pollinating itself, a flower will be stronger if it gets pollen from a different flower. So let's talk a little bit about some of these powerful pollinators. So here's one of our most well-known pollinators, the very, very famous bee. There are 400 different kinds of bees in Maryland, 400. And I bet you know the names of some of them, even though you didn't know they were all bees. You know the honeybee. It makes our honey that we love so much. It lives in hives. And we have carpenter bees that we sometimes see in the spring. They're really big, fluffy bees that stare at us. Those are often male bees. They may look fearsome, but bees do not actually, male bees, I should say, don't sting. And many of our bees don't sting, or they have stingers that are so small they can't go through our skin. We are familiar with the honeybee. The honeybee does have a stinger and it will sting to protect its hive, but once it loses its stinger, that bee actually dies. So it does not want to sting people. So a lot of people are nervous about bees because they feel like they're going to sting, but many bees don't sting at all. All boy bees don't sting, and bees generally have no interest in stinging you. They're only stinging because they're scared and they don't have another choice in the matter. So there's our bee, one of our most important pollinators, and they collect pollen on their fuzzy bodies and become covered with pollen. And that is the yellow that you see on that bee's body. So some of the flowers that bees like to pollinate are all of these. They use these petals as landing pads, and then they get the nectar and the pollen from inside these flower heads right there. We'll talk about nectar in a second. All right. So they like all kinds of easy ones to get in and out of. They like all different sorts of shapes. They are very powerful pollinators. They do have some colors they prefer. They actually can see in ultraviolet. So the colors they see can be really amazing when they're looking at where they want to land. So you can see the yellow on this insect here, and this looks an awful lot like a bee, but it's not. It's slightly different. This is actually from the fly family, like our house flies. This is a bee mimic, which means it looks an awful lot like a bumblebee or a bee, but it is a different family, and it finds pollination very useful, and it thinks that if people are nervous or other organisms aren't nervous because they think it might sting, that it will get left alone. So it has developed a look that is very similar to a bee. They have just one set of wings. There's a few differences between flies and bees. So think about our houseflies, an important pollinator. So when they're really bugging you, try to catch it and put it outside instead of smushing it. Here is a beautiful pollinator that we all enjoy seeing, and they're so quick we often miss them. This is the hummingbird. The ruby-throated hummingbird is one of Maryland's biggest bird pollinators. These birds are amazing. If you want to learn more about a particular kind of bird, pick this guy. These guys can fly backwards. They can fly upside down. They are more maneuverable than a helicopter, and they can beat their wings so fast that you can't see them. It looks like a blur. What this bird is trying to get to is actually a little bit different from the pollen, which you can see at the head of the flower there, at the opening. This bird is trying to get into nectar, which is found at the base of flowers. So tube-like flowers often bribe pollinators to come and sip the nectar that the plants produce. So that doesn't really aid in pollination, but what it does is it gets the animal close enough so that pollen is brushed onto their heads or their wings, and they pick up pollen that way, and then when they visit another flower, that pollen gets deposited on the pistil and pollination is achieved. So think of nectar. A new word is like Coca-Cola. It's like a super delicious sweet treat for the animals that come visit these flowers. So we're going to talk about, here are the words again. The stamen, that is the male part where the pollen is on it. And the female part is the pistil. Stigma is part of that, but the pistil is the big word. I'm trying to repeat these words so you recognize them later. So these are all flowers that have nectar in them that hummingbirds like. You can see here we have the stamens popping out of the flower, and the pistil looks a little bit different. So it's probably that round thing. The pistil is usually one little piece coming out, and there's usually several stamens around that. So hummingbirds particularly like red flowers, and they like that tube shape. Right, so this is kind of a more unusual flower that we might not see all that often. These are flowers that are pollinated by a special type of animal that are attracted to bats. Bats like those unusual flowers, and there's going to be a cool picture of a bat eating the pollen directly off of those stamens. Pollen is really high in protein. I don't know if your parents tell you to eat your protein, but I know that I tell my kids that. That's an important part of your diet, and it builds your muscles. And that's what this bat is doing, is eating that protein from the pollen. It's just licking them right off of the pistils and stamens. Do me a favor, please, don't write on the screen, because then the rest of us can't see what we're looking at as easily.
Yeah, Miss Amanda, you can also control the annotation. So if you do not allow anyone to annotate.
You can go to security and disable annotation.
I don't think I can do that while I'm presenting. Unfortunately, I think I have to go back to Zoom. So I'll just ask everybody to not write on things, and I will work on going to security next time. Thank you. Was that John? I appreciate your help. Or maybe John's son. Okay, so here is a butterfly. So butterflies, you can see, have this long, weird, it's actually kind of like a straw. It's not a tongue, it's not really a straw, it's not a nose. We're gonna call it a mouth part because it's a specialized part of the butterfly's mouth that has developed so that it can sip the nectar right from the base of flowers. Butterflies are not actually fantastic pollinators, but they prefer specific flowers, so they're very effective. They don't pick up that much pollen, but then they go to a flower that is almost identical, and they're good pollinators because they do that. And they travel further. Here we go. Oh, and here is a butterfly relative that is very similar to a butterfly, but is furry, has fur all over its body and its legs. And this guy flies at night. This is a moth. We have many species of moths. They are very similar to butterflies, but they just have a slightly different time that they're out. Moths are usually nocturnal. They usually have very fuzzy antennae. That's one of the main differences between moths and butterflies, and that those fuzzy antennae allow them to sense what is around them. They can smell and they can test the wind. They can feel things through their antenna. Butterflies can see better because it's daytime, so their antennas are not specialized like that. All right, they like white flowers. Oh, here is a pollinator we don't often think of as a pollinator. This is one of our beetle species. We have many beetle species. It's one of the more common animals in the animal world, just thousands and thousands of species of beetles. These guys are clumsy flyers. You've seen a ladybug fly. They can fly, but they are not very good at aiming or flying in the wind. So they like to be able to walk through their flowers. They like flat flowers that they can walk from flower to flower. So easy to walk across. Oh, and here's one that we don't have in our country, but it's one of the few mammal pollinators. This is a lemur from Madagascar, and it spends a lot of its time chasing nectar and pollinating different flowers. So even though it's big, it can live on that soda sugar water. And then here we have a nice deep flower. Who do we think might pollinate a flower like that? Probably has some nectar down here. You can put your answer in the chat box if you think you know. So a pollinator is gonna need to get way deep in here in order to get the nectar. So who might do that? If you know, put it in the chat box, but this one would be a hummingbird. Okay, here's another question. This is a white flower that opens at night. Who do you think might pollinate a white flower that opens at night? If you guessed a moth, you would be right. Nice job. Oh, here's a huge, big sunflower. The nice flat head and lots of landing petals. Who do you think might like to come and like yellow flowers? If you guessed a bee, you would be right. Okay, so we have learned about a lot of different pollinators right now. And now we're going to take a closer look at your flower. Let's see. Okay, oh, we do need to talk about threats to our insects and all of our pollinators. One of the biggies is, we talked about this last week, when people put chemicals on their flowers to help them grow or to keep other bugs off of them. Often that can hurt our flowers. I'm sorry, our flowers are okay, but the nectar and the pollen can get chemicals on them that are bad for our pollinators. So even if a chemical is supposed to kill mosquitoes, sometimes those chemicals they attack the nerves of the bumblebees or the different pollinators, and so that means that our bees cannot find the flowers that they need, or they fly strangely and they can't pollinate very effectively. Also, every time we take down large sections of trees, we are eliminating some of the food that our pollinators need. So these are two big areas of risk for our pollinator friends. Okay, so these are two very common flowers. You might have brought one with you today. The one on the left here is called clover. This is an incredibly popular flower for honeybees, strangely. And this guy over here is a dandelion. And these are unusual flowers because they have tiny little flowers all packed in together. So these are good for beetles or for animals that like to walk to collect their nectar and pollen. So you can see inside of each of these tiny little filaments is a whole flower. We have the stamen and we have the pistil all within each floret. So take a look at your flower and think about if you have one of these flowers that has lots of little florets all packed together. And if you do, then a magnifying glass might help you see that, but you can also just look very closely and see if you can see those individual florets. If you have more of a tube-like flower, then you're going to also be able to see the pistil, and then the stamen is tucked right inside, and that's where the pollen is going to come off of. So we're going to actually now take a look at the flowers that we have and just kind of pull them apart a little bit. I have one of the ones with the little florets. I will also show you a bigger flower with the stamen and pistil more obviously. But you can kind of take off a petal and you can think about a bumblebee landing on that, and it slants downhill in order for the bee or the beetle to access the little florets in there. So if you have a flower, take a look at it And go ahead and let's identify the parts. We have the leaves. You can take them off if you want. This is science. In science, sometimes we take things off to figure out the parts of the whole. Here we have the stem. The stem will grow longer or shorter depending on how much sunlight that flower needs.
Miss Amanda, do you want me to put you on spotlight video, or you want to show this presentation slide?
Oh, you are right. I will go back so that I can show everybody myself. Thank you. Nope, it's not showing me yet.
You can cancel sharing.
Ah, thank you. There we go. Okay.
Yeah, now you're on the spotlight video.
Me better. Okay, so we have the leaves. This is what makes the food for each plant. This is the stem that grows longer or shorter depending on how much sunlight the flower needs to get in order to grow. These leaves create the food, so often there are going to be more leaves coming off of the stem so that that plant can eat. It absorbs the sunlight, which is turned into their food and energy. And then we have these petals here that slant down to the flower head. And if you look very closely, you can see those individual florets there. I will show you on a bigger flower, a really big flower, that kind of shows the differences. This piece here, which is different, that's going to be, that has the pollen on it, and that pollen gets picked up by those pollinators. And once that happens, the pollen will travel down the pistil length, and this whole flower will close back up and then create a seed and things that can be formed in there. And often that sets off another process. Those nuts and seeds, or let's say, does have a flower, and that flower, when it gets pollinated, will turn into that nut, which will drop. Then the squirrel does is it picks it up, carries it somewhere else, and if oak tree is lucky, that squirrel will actually bury it and forget that it's there. That's how a new oak tree gets planted. But fruits will get eaten by all sorts of things. They sometimes get pooped out, and then the seed gets a chance to grow that way. So plants are really amazing. For animals that can't move, they really know how to spread their seeds. All right, so we have talked about a lot of different pollination there and a lot of different parts of the plants. And we are gonna go and we're gonna do something fun. No, gotta get to all my screens here. All right. And we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna do a little quiz to see how much of this information you have been able to absorb. So at this point, I'm going to show you how to get to a new window on your screen. You guys are so good at this stuff, you may already know. What I'd like you to do is go over to the right-hand upper part of your screen, and you're gonna tap those 3 little dots. And when you get there, you're gonna open a new window. Like that. So you're gonna still keep me here, but you're gonna
do it.
You're gonna be able to hear me, but you're going to open a new window so that you can interact with your screen. So once you go up and you have a new window, raise your hand. You're gonna put a kahoot.it in there. And you're gonna get a screen that you're probably very familiar with.
I don't have those dots.
Okay, so if you go over to the top right-hand part of your screen Are you on a phone or are you on a computer?
I'm on a computer.
You're on a computer. If you can't find the dots, that's okay. You're gonna play with me. If you can find the dots,
I don't have any dots.
that's okay. You'll play with me. If you do have the dots, the pin number that you're gonna enter is, oh, not that one. This guy right over here. 0745107.
Okay, turn to Google Chrome.
Okay. So if you would like to play with me, if you don't want to open up a Kahoot window for yourself, then you and I will just read the questions and you may say out loud the answers to these questions. So in this point, if you don't have your own Kahoot screen, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and we will play together.
Okay.
Does anybody want to
be fun?
Miss Amanda, there is a question from the audience. What's the ID?
Okay, the ID is over here, and it is 0745107.
Yeah, I'm typing it in the chat so everyone can see.
Thank you so much. 0745107. If you want me to, pause for another minute to give you a little bit of time to set up, just holler. You can put.
I already typed the ID, the code in the chat, so you can copy and paste.
I entered John for my nickname. For some reason I got logged out, so I'm gonna join again. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
But my name's still in there, so.
Okay. Okay.
Can I
So
rejoin?
you may absolutely rejoin. You can put a different name. If your name has already been played, you should be able to put your name.
I did that. I did it.
Okay. So remember, if you can't get this screen open, you're just going to play with me. I'm going to read the questions and you are going to tell me what answers to put in there. So even if 5 of us are playing that way, that's okay. I will take the most popular answer.
We're gonna watch some Google Chrome.
If this doesn't work for you, that's okay. And I'm naming it groups since I don't know who all is going to be helping me solve this Kahoot. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start it unless I hear someone saying, wait, wait, wait. Okay, here we go. Those are elementary pollinator Kahoots. Which of these animals is not a pollinator?
A bird.
Is that a honey badger?
A honey badger.
Okay, a monarch butterfly, ruby-throated, or Mexican long-tongued bat? Honey badger? That's what I heard. We get it right? We got it right. Good job, honey badger person. All right. Let me go. I have to push the next button. Okay, we're gonna go to the next one. These birds love long tube-like flowers that hold nectar. Blue jays, cardinals, ospreys, or hummingbirds? Just say that.
Hummingbird.
Hummingbirds! Everybody, you learned some pollinators. Okay.
Hummingbird.
Well done. Okay, let's go to the next one. What can happen if pesticides are sprayed over pollinating insects? The insects can take a bath to remove the chemicals. Insects do not mind pesticides and chemicals. They can move to a new place or the insects can die.
The insect can die.
I think you're right. Good job, everybody. Okay, well done. Shadow Shroom is doing very well, and I can't read that, but way to go, you guys. This bee species lives in large hives and makes the honey we love. The honeybee?
Honeybees.
The honeybee.
You're right. You guys are too good. Way to go. Okay, next one. All right. This flower, part of the flower produces the pollen. The stamen, the pistil, the petals, or chlorophyll. Which produces the pollen?
Stamen.
Which? Say it out loud.
Stamen.
Stamen is right. Go. Good memory. Remember, it's all about those new words. Well done.
Good.
Okay, let's go. Some plants don't need an animal to spread their pollen. They rely on this instead. Wind, water, sunlight, or earthquakes?
Wind.
Think dandelions.
You are right. Good job thinking dandelions. That's exactly right. Okay, this type, we didn't really cover this, so this is when you have to use your imagination. This bee type sings to a particular flower to get them to release their pollen. Honeybee, carpenter bee, bumblebee, or ground bee. Which of those sounds like make a noise? Honeybee, bumblebee, carpenter, or ground?
Carpenter.
Carpenter? That one, I forgot to mention it. That's the bumblebee. It buzzes
I
the
knew it.
flower.
Bumblebee,
It
but-
buzzes to make the pollen release. Good guess on carpenter bee. That we did talk about that.
Wait a second.
These small pollinators are in the same family of butterflies, but fly
Moth!
at night.
Moth!
Okay, good job, good job. Woohoo!
Almost done.
All right. How does the butterfly get its nectar? Picks it up on sticky pads, it pierces the flowers and eats the nectar, it uses the wings to fan the flowers, or it uses a long, tongue-shaped like straw to drink the nectar.
So what is it?
Tongue.
Tongue, our tongue. Good job. Yes, it has a weird mouth part that's shaped like a straw that sucks that nectar out. And then this pollinator is a clumsy animal and prefers to walk from flower to flower. Bumblebee or butterfly. I heard beetle. Nice job. Okay, I think this is our last question. Oh, two more. What will all caterpillars grow up to be? Uh-oh, this is a tricky one.
Butterfly.
Butterflies.
Holy bugs.
You knew that one.
Butterfly.
Good job. All right, and this is our last one. What is the sweet, sugary liquid flowers make to encourage
called?
pollinators to visit? Petals, nectar,
Yep.
stamens,
No.
or flower
Nectar.
juice?
Okay, nectar.
Nectar. Flower or flower juice.
Oh, fun. You got it. It is the nectar. So this person, Chi-Chi, is that right? Got the next highest score, beat us, beat the group, and then we have Shadow Shroom and Random Typeset. Well done, everybody. And I am very impressed with how much you have learned. And then we just have one more question for you. What was, you put in the chat box, what was the coolest thing you learned today? Or what pollination fact are you going to share with your families today? So either the coolest thing or the thing that you think your family needs to know. Here we have the stamens covered in pollen. We have a bee drinking water.
That's not a bee, that's a hornet.
I think you're right. It does not have fur on its legs.
That's a
But
hornet.
bees have to drink water too. They can sometimes get their liquid from nectar, and hornets can often get it from their prey, but they do generally have to sip water from dewdrops or other sources of liquid. And here we have a bat finding its pollen to eat for the protein. So do we have anything in the chat box of cool things that people learned today?
I win this game. 2.
Okay, we have an input from Raj saying that beetles walk to flower, then fly.
Very good. Bees do. They will walk to flowers if they can, and then they can also fly. And beetles walk from flower to flower. A lot of people don't think of beetles as pollinators, but they are important.
Some people do not like bees because they sting them lots.
But we know that bees are important and that they don't want to sting you. So that's a really good thing to tell your family. The bees they're not interested in stinging you. And most bees can only sting you, well, most honeybees can only sting you one time and then they die. So they really don't want to sting you.
The bees make for us honey. Yeah.
They make our honey. You guys learn lots of good things. I love it.
Honey.
Anything else?
Bumblebees are smart because one time a bumblebee flew in the garage and there was a window in the garage door, so the bumblebee thought it was a window and it cannot stop, so it went through the door. They're smart.
How many of you are going to be a little more comfortable with bees going forward? Raise your hand if you're going to like bees and be a little bit more excited to see them.
Are you?
Are you going to be happier to see bees now that you know what their job is? Yeah. When they make those fruits and seeds,
I love bees.
they make almost 1/3 of the food we eat. So every time you eat fruits and vegetables, almost all of that is made from pollination. So they're really important to take good care of. Well, anyway, that is the end of my presentation. Do you guys have any questions?
Me too.
Do you guys have any questions? If you do, you can put in the chat box. We have some comments. The coolest thing I learned today is about pistils.
About petals. Cool.
And then there's another comment by Alan. Beetles can pollinate and the bees die when they sting. Yeah. So Alan learned. Any other questions? If you have questions, you can put in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask directly to Miss Amanda. Either will be fine.
Those will be fine. I should say that remember we have 400 different kinds of bees in Maryland. That means that only some of those can sting. None of the boy bees can sting. And that out of those 400 different kinds of bees, many of them don't sting at all. The ones that do die after they sting you are the honeybees, which are the ones that pollinate a lot of our crops. But there's lots of other kinds of bees that have a different kind of a stinging operation. And almost all of them hurt a lot less than the honeybee because the honeybee has it has like hooks on its stinger. And that's why, and those hooks tend to stay in your skin when they sting you, which is why it stings. Most bees don't hurt that much. So they're not scary. Now, there are wasps and hornets that can sometimes look a lot like bees, but they don't have furry bodies for pollinators. And these guys are predators. They actually will lay their eggs in a caterpillar or they'll eat some other insects. So those might be the animals that you fear because of their stinging. They do tend to have a bigger sting. But they don't have fur on their body, so keep an eye on that. If you're nervous and there's a bee that's close to you, check. Does it have furry legs, a furry body? And if it does, you don't need to worry. Just stay still and it will move off because it thinks you're nectar or pollen and it's confused.
Miss Amanda, we have a question from Alan. Why are bees interested in yellow flowers?
So they have a different way of seeing than people do. We see a long spectrum of colors, but there are ways to see things that are in ultraviolet. They can actually see shorter or longer wavelengths. So yellow stands out to them as a color that is very bright in ultraviolet lights. And that's one of the reasons they like yellow flowers.
Thanks for answering my question.
You are very welcome. I'm happy to see you guys and spread the good word about pollination and pollinators.
Yeah, so guys, when you have time to go to your garden or work in the park, you can pay attention to different types of flowers and look at different parts of them.
And see who you think might be coming to visit them to pollinate them. because they all go together, the flowers and the pollinators, which is really cool.
Any questions? If no, it's already 3:41, and I think
Hello.
for the great talk.
Thank you.